Conor McGregor's rise in the world of mixed martial arts was truly one of a kind, turning himself from an Irish plumber to one of the most recognizable athletes in the world today. The Conor McGregor that took the world by storm combined a ferocious fighting style along with a razor-sharp tongue and unrelenting bravado, positioning himself uniquely as someone who could walk the walk just as well as he could talk the talk. Yet, as the years went by, a transformation has seemingly taken place. The same qualities and behaviors that McGregor once mocked in those around him began to be observed by fans in him. This is the story of how Conor McGregor became everything that he once hated. Let's first talk about Conor's history of ridiculing fighters who have pulled out of fights, only for himself to pull out of one of the biggest fights of his career. In February of 2016, he had just recently surged through the UFC featherweight division and culminated his run by knocking out longtime featherweight champion Jose Aldo in historic fashion. To follow up his meteoric rise, Conor dared to do something that no other fighter had yet succeeded in doing, becoming a champion in two weight divisions simultaneously. Conor was slated to square off against then lightweight champion Rafael dos Anjos in what was the most highly anticipated fight in UFC history. However, to the dismay of fans around the world, this fight would never come to fruition, as just 2 weeks before the fight, RDA would be forced to pull out of the fight due to a broken foot, while also posting photos of his injury online. Conor, in true Conor fashion, publicly ridiculed RDA for pulling out of the fight by downplaying the severity of the broken foot and claiming that RDA instead pulled out of the fight simply because he was simply scared to fight Conor.
It's always happening. They always pull, they always run, they always make it out like they want it, but really they don't want it. So I was expecting it, you know. I looked at the picture Dos Anjos put up, and it's a bruise. I mean, I heard ice works wonders. What do you want me to say?
That wasn't the only time that Conor has thrown shade at an opponent for pulling out of fights. At the UFC 205 post-fight press conference, where Conor would ultimately fulfill his goal of becoming the UFC's first ever double champion, he had the following to say about up-and-coming fighter Khabib Nurmagomedov.
On a show up, and he's a consistent pull-out merchant. He had a good performance tonight, fair play to him. We'll see where it goes, but I need to see active. I need to see activity. I need to see consistency. I need to see me.
Admittedly, I myself at the time loved hearing Conor ridicule his potential opponents for pulling out of fights. Not only was this the height of the McGregor era where everything he said on the mic was pure gold, but at this point in time, Conor himself had never pulled out of a fight before. This really helped strengthen his image amongst fans as a certified badass who embodied the ethos of anyone, anywhere, anytime. In the mid-2010s, Conor was on top of the world, not only because he was an exciting fighter who won fights in dramatic fashion, but also because he was reliable and never disappointed fans by pulling out of fights. And the fact that he would openly insult, quote, pullout merchants only succeeded in increasing his favor with fans. However, fast forward to 2024, Conor McGregor was slated to finally square up against Michael Chandler at UFC 303 in what would be his grand return after suffering a devastating injury at UFC 264 over 3 years ago. This was a massively anticipated fight, with fans all over the world eagerly hyping up Conor's return to the UFC. The hype got so big that the UFC even scheduled and organized a promotional press conference in Dublin, Ireland, where both Conor and Michael would speak in front of a crowd of thousands. The press conference, which was slated to take place on June 3rd, 2024, sold out almost immediately, and fans around the world made travel plans in order to see Conor McGregor back on stage. However, things took a strange turn when the event was abruptly cancelled with no warning less than 24 hours before the doors of the venue were to open. This was obviously deeply upsetting for fans who had tickets to the press conference, but it was also deeply concerning for fans anticipating Conor's UFC 303 appearance. Many fans, including myself, saw this as a bad omen and worried that there would be more bad news to come. And lo and behold, in the following 2 weeks, the status of UFC 303 was thrown into chaos, with Conor McGregor reportedly canceling all media obligations for the event, as well as the UFC removing online promotional material featuring Conor from the internet, all of which led to widespread speculation about whether or not Conor would fight at UFC 303. Eventually, the UFC announced the fight was cancelled due to Conor McGregor suffering a, quote, broken toe. This was devastating news for the UFC fans who held out hope that Conor would be able to rally and step into fight at UFC 303 and mark the first time that Conor would officially pull out of a scheduled fight. Now, the irony of this situation is pretty obvious and probably goes without saying, but I'll say it. It's pretty pretty hilarious to me that Conor 8 years ago trashed Rafael dos Anjos for pulling out of their scheduled fight due to injury, only to have Conor pull out of his UFC 303 fight due to a similar injury. RDA himself also found the humor in this, seeing as he made a tweet directed at Conor which was captioned, "It's just a bruise, take some ibuprofen," which directly mirrored what Conor had to say about RDA back in 2016. I'd also like to point out that having a broken foot like RDA did seems like a much more serious injury than a broken toe, which Conor himself claimed to have. You know, it's funny, Conor, who once prided himself on fighting through any injury, canceled a highly anticipated fight over an injury. But to be totally fair to Conor, this was the only time that he's ever had to pull out of a fight, and even though it was a big disappointment, Conor still has a much better track record of pulling out of fights than many other famous UFC fighters. And sure, it's also funny that RDA got revenge on Conor with his tweet, but at the same time, I really don't expect fighters to step into fights with broken bones, even if it is just a broken toe. But on that note, I really do think that the Conor of old probably would have stepped into the octagon with a broken toe if he had to. I really believe that the Conor that took the world by storm would have put his money where his mouth is, and he would have shown the quote pull-out merchants that injury or not, he wasn't the sort of fighter to back out of a fight. And again, although I don't blame Conor for pulling out of UFC 303, seeing as he had a broken toe, I think this situation does speak to how Conor has changed from the man that he used to be. Alright, let's now talk about Conor's suspected steroid use. Back in 2016, as Conor was heading into his first fight with Nate Diaz, he was accused by Nate of using steroids. Conor did not take these accusations lightly, as he angrily refuted the idea that he would ever use steroids, stating that he's always been against performance-enhancing drugs.
They're all on steroids.
Only weight I care about steroids. What are you talking about steroids? Don't be putting my name in steroids. I'm majored against that. Don't put my name in the name of steroids, Nate.
In this same press conference, Conor would turn the tables on Nate and ask Nate whether or not he knew his teammates Jake Shields and Gilbert Melendez were on steroids, as they had both previously failed drug tests.
Hey, everybody.
Your teammate Gil and Jake were too caught on steroids. Not
And
me.
you and those
Not me.
and
What are you talking about? Not me. I'm not on no steroids. What the fuck are you talking about? Your two teammates were on steroids. That's your two boys, the scrap pack. Remember that? Well, them. They were. Did you know they were taking that stuff? Did you know they were taking that stuff? Did you?
You're on steroids.
Sure I am. I'm just an animal. I'm just an animal.
Conor was visibly upset at Nate's steroid accusations throughout this sequence, and even though I might be naive in saying this, I feel like Conor's reaction was sincere and he was actually deeply offended that he was being painted as a user of steroids. However, fast forward again to 2024, and the conversations surrounding Conor McGregor and steroid use have taken a completely different form. After Conor's leg break at UFC 264, Conor had himself removed from the USADA testing pool, meaning he would no longer be subject to random drug screenings. And almost immediately upon escaping USADA's testing protocols, numerous pictures surfaced showing Conor's dramatic physical transformation. Long gone was the 145-pound fighter. He now resembled a middleweight with a significantly more muscular and larger physique. As time passed and Conor remained out of the USADA testing pool, his body continued to bulk up, looking more like a bodybuilder than the former featherweight champion. Even Conor's head shape and facial structure were different from what fans were used to seeing. This drastic change sparked discussions in the combat sports world, with many prominent figures questioning Conor's potential drug use. Notably, the popular YouTuber More Plates More Dates created multiple videos analyzing Conor's transformation and speculating on whether or not he might be using performance-enhancing drugs. In More Plates More Dates video titled "Who the Fook Is That Guy?", he discusses how huge Conor looks, pointing out the dramatic transformation in Conor's physique after leaving the USADA program. He found it interesting how the timeline fit perfectly, raising suspicions about Conor's drug use.
To go from that to this, that's like 20 to 30 pounds of actual muscle accrued, which is just not going to happen naturally, in my opinion.
Around this same time, Joe Rogan also made claims about Conor, commenting on his significantly larger build and the implications of his absence from USADA testing, even claiming Conor's urine would, quote, melt the USADA cup, which did not sit well with Conor, as he immediately replied back on Twitter saying Joe looks like his piss melts his knickers, despite the fact Joe has always been open about his TRT and steroid use in his personal life. Also, who even cares if Joe uses steroids? The guy is not a professional athlete. athlete. Anyways, this sudden change in Conor's physical appearance, coupled with his online antics, inadvertently put a spotlight on himself, opening the door for onlookers to take notice of this bizarre and rapid physical transformation. The once lean Conor McGregor had transformed into a completely different person, and naturally this stirred speculation about whether or not Conor used steroids in order to recover from his broken leg, and has continued to do so ever since. Alright, so personally, if you're asking me, I definitely think that Conor has been using steroids at the very least ever since he broke his leg against Dustin Poirier in 2021. Could he have been using steroids prior? For sure, but ever since his physical rehab started and he wasn't being tested by USADA, his change in appearance is way too drastic and definitely leads me to believe he's been taking at the very least HGH. Like honestly, compare these two photos of Conor prior to the leg break versus after and tell me if this looks like natural aging to you. It seriously looks like he aged 20 years even though it's only been 3 years. And again, maybe Conor was actually using steroids even when he was fighting at featherweight, but at least it wasn't blatant like it is now. At least back in the day, Conor had plausible deniability, whereas now anyone with eyes can see how much he's changed physically, both in his body and his face. So looking back at Conor's press conference with Nate all those years ago, it's really funny listening to how offended Conor got after Nate claimed that he was on steroids. It's funny hearing Conor throw his little fit about how he would never touch steroids and that he's always been against them. And again, maybe he was on steroids during this time, but it's not like it was 100% obvious that he was on roids like it is today. I don't know, I can definitely keep talking on this subject, but just remember the ironic fact that Conor once shamed any and all fighters who use steroids to gain a competitive advantage. How times have changed. The last topic that I want to touch on in this video is how Conor changed from a razor-focused athlete who claimed to be obsessed with nothing but fighting into a serial partier who can't seem to stay away from drinking and drugs. Before we go any further, I want to show you this clip from an interview Conor did in January of 2015 where he credits his success in MMA to his dedication and his ability to stay away from distractions, namely partying.
Partying is weakness for the soul, my friend, so I try and avoid it.
And although I would love to tell you that Conor only recently started getting into excessive partying, that just would not be true. Major concerns with Conor's work ethic started to rise during his training camp heading into his fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov. According to Conor's own head coach, John Kavanagh, Conor not only drank during his fight camp, but would also go missing for several days on end when he should have been preparing for the biggest fight of his life. As a fan of Conor, this was shocking news for me to hear, especially when I considered Conor's previous level of dedication, as well as considering he had such a tough opponent in front of him in the form of Khabib. Not only was Conor drinking during his training camp, Conor very clearly stumbled into the pre-fight press conference drunk on his own whiskey Proper 12. So literally just 2 days before the biggest MMA fight of his life, Conor just couldn't say no to the alcohol. And as time went on, it seemed like Conor volleyed back and forth between his dedication to training and his desire to party. Because although Conor has seemingly been more successful at getting through fight camps focused, at least compared to the Khabib fight, there have been countless videos over the years showing Conor partying and drinking all over the world. Not only that, fans have suspected that in many of these videos, it's clear that Conor has been indulging in, let's just call it the booger sugar.
Yeah, look at this. You know them, you little muppets.
I would argue that the most troubling footage that we've seen of Conor was when he was promoting his acting debut in the movie Roadhouse. The extensive media coverage surrounding the movie's promotion brought more scrutiny to Conor, especially during an interview with his co-actor Jake Gyllenhaal. In this interview, Conor appeared visibly off, sparking speculation of drug use. Conor was twitching and struggling to complete sentences, a stark contrast to the sharp-witted and eloquent fighter he once was. He went from delivering razor-sharp comebacks and roasts towards his opponents to appearing unable to promote his own movie effectively. This decline was clearly evident as Jake Gyllenhaal himself had to help move the interview along. And even though I just said that Conor has been better about staying focused during training camp since the Khabib fight, Conor was literally seen partying multiple times leading into his UFC 303 fight with Michael Chandler. In the lead up to UFC 303, several clips surfaced of Conor not only at the pub but partying and dancing at clubs. This behavior figure was definitely unexpected for an athlete preparing for one of the most significant comeback fights in UFC history. And look, guys, do I even really need to say it? The Conor McGregor of today is a very far cry from the Conor McGregor that once said partying is weakness for the soul, so I try to avoid it. You can even find several other very famous Conor McGregor clips from back in the day where he speaks of his unwavering dedication to his craft and how he won't allow anything to get in the way of his progress as a fighter. But fast forward to now, and it seems like Conor has lost his way quite a bit when it comes to staying disciplined. And I know some of you guys might be saying, do I really expect Conor to be in the gym every second of the day? And no, of course I don't, but if he's serious about making a big return to MMA, and if he's serious about being a champion again like he says he is, I really think he should avoid the pub and the clubs and the narcotics during the periods of time when he's not training. Honestly, I'm really curious what the Conor who said partying is weakness for the soul would have to say about the Conor McGregor of today. On one hand, I'm sure that Conor would be extremely proud of all of the things that he accomplished, both athletically and financially. But on the other hand, I can't help but feel like he would be disappointed at how he strayed off the path of discipline and dedication. And don't get me wrong here, guys, I personally don't have an issue with people partying or drinking or even doing recreational drugs. I really don't. Like, if Conor decided to hang up the gloves today and truly said goodbye to competing, then I would encourage him to go out and have as much fun as he can because he's earned it. But that's the thing. Conor is still an athlete and he claims that he still has title aspirations in the UFC. And it might sound crazy to hear this, but I do want to see Conor succeed still. And the simple truth of it is, I don't think that he's going to find much success in the octagon if he continues his current partying lifestyle. Again, it's really ironic that Conor once said partying is weakness for the soul because nowadays I don't know a professional athlete who parties more than he does. Alright guys, these are all the things that I wanted to talk about when it comes to Conor McGregor. We talked about how Conor used to mock fighters who pull out of fights only for him to pull out of UFC 303. We went over how Conor used to villainize fighters who use steroids, but nowadays it really seems like he's been using steroids himself. And the biggest thing for me is how Conor went from being an insanely focused fighter who wanted nothing to do with partying and has since become a bit of a club rat with an addiction problem. It's funny because without Conor's charisma and his verbal skills, he wouldn't have reached the heights that he has. However, those same words that have made him so famous have also created a clear timeline of his transformation into someone who now does the exact things that he once ridiculed. Conor McGregor's story is a compelling one of rise, fall, and transformation. From his days of fighting on welfare driven by sheer determination to becoming a global icon known for his bravado and unyielding confidence, Conor's journey is marked by contradictions and changes. As he navigates the world of fame, wealth, and fighting, the man who once stood as a paragon of perseverance now grapples with the very behaviors he once despised. And just to wrap things up here, guys, this video is not about demonizing Conor and painting him as some sort of hypocritical degenerate, because in reality, this is a tale as old as time. When regular, humble people get thrust into the spotlight and they suddenly have both riches and fame showered upon them, it takes a very strong person to be able to resist the pitfalls that come along with it. Conor McGregor achieved his dreams. He became a double world champion. He became an international superstar, and he became more wealthy than most people could ever dream of becoming. So no, I don't expect the Conor McGregor of today to be the exact same guy he was when he was literally fighting to survive all of those years ago. And just to put myself in Conor's shoes for a minute, Conor changed the sport of MMA in a major way. So shouldn't he be allowed to change a little bit too? I appreciate you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to drop a like, and I will see you on the next one.